As she walked through the servants' corridors, she was struck by how different this part of the palace felt from the grand public spaces she was accustomed to. The walls were simpler, painted in practical colors rather than decorated with priceless artwork. The floors were clean but showed the wear of constant use. The lighting was functional rather than atmospheric. Yet there was something about these spaces that felt more alive, more real than the formal rooms where she spent most of her time. She encountered several staff members during her walk, and each interaction followed the same pattern. They would stop whatever they were doing, offer respectful greetings, and wait to see if she needed anything before continuing with their tasks. Their responses were perfectly appropriate, but Isabella sensed the careful distance they maintained, the invisible barrier that her title created between them and her. She wanted to break through that barrier, to have a normal conversation, but she had no idea how to begin. It was during one of these morning walks, about a week after she had started taking them, that Isabella had her first real conversation with Guard Mitchell. She had been walking through a corridor that overlooked the palace gardens when she noticed him standing at one of the large windows, completely motionless. At first, she assumed he was simply maintaining his post, watching for any security concerns. But as she approached, she realized his attention was focused on something specific in the garden below. Following his gaze, Isabella saw a small bird that appeared to be injured, struggling to fly near one of the fountains. Without thinking, she moved closer to the window and made a soft sound of concern. Guard Mitchell turned, immediately straightening into his professional posture when he saw her. "Your Highness," he said, offering a respectful nod. "I apologize. I was momentarily distracted by that bird down there. It seems to be hurt." Isabella looked at him more closely than she ever had before. His face showed genuine concern for the small creature, and she realized that his temporary distraction from his duties came not from carelessness but from compassion. Something about his honest admission of concern, his willingness to acknowledge that he had been affected by the bird's plight, touched something deep in her heart. "Is there anything that can be done for it?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness in extending the conversation. Guard Mitchell looked at her with obvious surprise, as if he had expected her to continue on her way rather than engage with his concern. After a moment, he said, "I was thinking I might ask one of the groundskeepers to check on it when I finish my shift. They know about wildlife care, and if it needs help, they would know what to do." Isabella felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Here was someone who cared about a small, injured bird enough to plan to help it, even though it had nothing to do with his official responsibilities. Here was someone whose compassion extended beyond his job requirements to encompass genuine care for all living things. It was the first glimpse she had been given into who Guard Mitchell was as a person, rather than just as an employee. "That's very kind of you," she said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. "I hope the bird will be okay." "So do I, Your Highness," he replied. And for just a moment, Isabella felt as though she was talking to another human being, rather than to someone whose every word was carefully measured for appropriateness. That brief interaction stayed with Isabella for the rest of the day. During her piano lesson, she found herself thinking about Guard Mitchell's concern for the injured bird. During her French tutorial, she wondered if the bird had been helped. During the formal tea with her mother and several ladies from prominent families, she caught herself wishing she could excuse herself to go check on both the bird and the man who had cared about its welfare. The next morning, Isabella deliberately took the same route through the palace, hoping to encounter Guard Mitchell again. She found him at his post, standing with the same professional attention to his surroundings. But when she approached the window where they had spoken the day before, she saw him glance briefly in her direction. She looked down at the garden and saw no sign of the injured bird. "Did the bird recover?" she asked, trying to sound casual, despite the fact that she had been thinking about it since their conversation. Guard Mitchell's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Yes, Your Highness. It turned out to have a minor wing injury, probably from flying into one of the glass panels. The groundskeeper, Mr. Peterson, was able to help it. He kept it in a safe place overnight, and this morning it flew away looking much stronger." Isabella felt a surge of happiness that surprised her with its intensity. "I'm so glad," she said. "Thank you for making sure it was cared for." "It was nothing, Your Highness," Guard Mitchell replied. But Isabella could see that her gratitude meant something to him. These encounters became a regular part of Isabella's morning routine. Each day she would find Guard Mitchell at his post, and they would exchange a few words about the weather, about something happening in the gardens, or about the various visitors coming to the palace that day. The conversations were brief and always appropriate, but gradually Isabella began to sense that Guard Mitchell was becoming more comfortable with their interactions. She learned small details about his life through these conversations. He had worked at the palace for 12 years, having come to the position after serving in the military. He lived in a small apartment about 20 minutes away from the palace. He was unmarried, though he had been engaged once, years ago, to a woman who decided she couldn't handle the demanding schedule and security requirements of his job. He spent his free time reading history books and working in a small garden behind his apartment building. More importantly, Isabella began to understand the kind of person Guard Mitchell was. He was observant, noticing small changes in the palace routine or in the people around him. He was thoughtful, taking time to consider his words before speaking. He was genuinely kind, showing concern not just for the injured bird, but for elderly visitors who seemed tired, for new staff members who appeared overwhelmed, for anyone who seemed to need a moment of extra care or attention. Isabella found herself looking forward to these brief morning conversations more than any other part of her day. For those few minutes, she felt like she was connecting with someone who saw her not just as a title, but as a person. Guard Mitchell never overstepped professional boundaries, never tried to extend their conversations beyond what was appropriate, but within those boundaries, he treated her with a warmth and genuine interest that she had been craving for years. One morning, about 3 weeks after their first conversation, Isabella noticed that Guard Mitchell seemed different. He maintained his professional demeanor, but there was something subdued about his manner, a heaviness that she had never seen before. When she made her usual casual comment about the beautiful morning weather, his response was polite, but lacked his usual warmth. Over the next several days, Isabella noticed that this subdued quality persisted. Guard Mitchell continued to perform his duties with perfect professionalism, but the light in his eyes had dimmed, and their brief conversations felt strained. Isabella found herself worrying about him, wondering what could have caused such a change in someone who had always seemed so steady and positive. She considered asking him directly if something was wrong, but she wasn't sure if such a question would be appropriate. Their relationship, while warmer than her interactions with other staff members, was still bounded by the realities of their different positions. She was the princess and he was an employee. There were limits to how personal their interactions could become, no matter how much she might want to offer comfort or support. The situation troubled Isabella more than she would have expected. She realized that in the short time she had been having these morning conversations with Guard Mitchell, he had become important to her in a way that went beyond his role as a protector. He had become the closest thing she had to a friend, even if the friendship was constrained by protocol and professional boundaries. Seeing him unhappy made her unhappy, and not knowing how to help him made her feel powerless in a way that was entirely new to her. Days passed with this heavy atmosphere hanging over their interactions. Isabella tried to bring extra warmth to their conversations, hoping that her attention might provide some small comfort, but she could see that whatever was troubling Guard Mitchell was not something that could be easily lifted by casual conversation. Then, one morning, Isabella encountered Guard Mitchell in an unexpected way. She had risen earlier than usual, unable to sleep due to her concern about his obvious distress, and had decided to take a walk through the palace gardens before breakfast. The early morning air was crisp and fresh, and the gardens were beautiful in the soft light of dawn. She had expected to be alone at that hour, but as she rounded a corner near the rose garden, she came upon Guard Mitchell, sitting on a small bench, his head in his hands. He looked up quickly when he heard her footsteps, immediately rising to his feet and assuming his professional posture. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to control. "I apologize, I didn't realize anyone would be walking in the gardens at this hour." Isabella could see that he had been crying, though he was trying desperately to compose himself. Her heart went out to him, and in that moment, all considerations of protocol and appropriate boundaries fell away. She saw not a palace guard, but a human being in pain, someone who had shown her kindness and who needed kindness in return. "Please," she said gently, "don't apologize. Are you all right? I've noticed that you seem troubled lately, and I've been worried about you." Guard Mitchell looked at her with obvious surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe that the princess had been concerned about his welfare. For a moment, his professional mask slipped completely, and Isabella saw the full extent of his distress. He began, then stopped, clearly struggling with whether it was appropriate to share his personal troubles with her. "Please," Isabella said again, moving closer. "We've talked almost every morning for weeks now. I know I'm the princess, but I'm also someone who cares about you. If something is wrong, I'd like to help if I can." The kindness in her voice seemed to break through his resistance. "It's my mother, Your Highness," he said quietly. "She's been ill for several months, and yesterday the doctors told us that she doesn't have much time left. I've been trying to arrange leave to spend time with her, but with the upcoming state visit and the security requirements, it's been difficult to get approval for extended time away." Isabella felt her heart break for him. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, who had shown such care and concern for everyone around him, and he was being prevented from caring for his own dying mother because of job responsibilities. The injustice of it filled her with an anger she had rarely felt before. "How long have you been trying to get this leave approved?" she asked. "About 2 weeks, Your Highness. The security chief understands the situation, but staffing is tight right now, and my supervisors are concerned about maintaining full coverage during the state visit." Isabella made a decision in that moment that would have surprised everyone who thought they knew her. "You're going to your mother," she said firmly. "Today. I don't care about the state visit or the security requirements. You're going to be with your mother, and you're going to stay with her for as long as she needs you." Guard Mitchell stared at her in amazement. "Your Highness, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think you understand the complexity of the security arrangements. I can't just leave." "Yes, you can," Isabella replied, her voice carrying a tone of royal authority she had never used before. "I'm going to speak with my father this morning. I'm going to tell him that I specifically request that you be granted immediate leave to care for your mother. And I'm going to make it clear that this is not a request I'm making lightly." The look of gratitude in Guard Mitchell's eyes was something Isabella knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Here was someone who had given so much of himself in service to her family. And now she finally had an opportunity to give something back to him.
It felt like the first truly meaningful thing she had done in her entire privileged life.
In their family, formal meetings were scheduled days or weeks in advance, and spontaneous conversations about serious matters simply didn't happen. But the urgency of Guard Mitchell's situation and the depth of her feeling about it gave her a courage she had never possessed before. She marched directly from the garden to the king's private study, past surprise secretaries and protocol officers who tried to remind her that His Majesty was preparing for important meetings. King Ferdinand looked up from the stack of documents he was reviewing, his eyebrows raised in surprise at his daughter's unannounced appearance. Isabella had always been the obedient child, the one who followed rules and respected boundaries, so this breach of protocol immediately captured his full attention. "Isabella," he said, setting down his papers, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Father, I need to ask you for something. And it's very important to me," she began, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. "Guard Mitchell has been trying for 2 weeks to get leave to be with his dying mother, and he's been denied because of security concerns about the state visit. I want you to approve his leave immediately." The king studied his daughter's face, clearly surprised by both her request and the passionate way she was making it. "Isabella, you don't understand the complexities of security arrangements. We can't simply remove personnel because of personal circumstances, especially not during a high-profile diplomatic event." "Yes, we can," Isabella replied, her voice growing stronger. "Father, this man has served our family faithfully for 12 years. He has dedicated his life to protecting us, and now his mother is dying, and he can't be with her because we won't let him go. That's not the kind of family I want us to be." King Ferdinand was quiet for a long moment, studying his daughter with new interest. He had never heard her speak with such conviction about anything before, had never seen her advocate so passionately for another person's welfare. "You seem to know quite a bit about Guard Mitchell's personal situation," he observed. "I've gotten to know him over the past few weeks," Isabella admitted. "He's a good man, Father. He cares about everyone around him, from injured birds in the garden to visitors who need help with the palace steps. He deserves to have someone care about him in return."
Something in his daughter's words seemed to reach the king in a way that surprised him. He had been so focused on preparing her for royal duties that he had never really considered whether she was developing the compassion that should be at the heart of true leadership.
Now seeing her fight for someone else's happiness, he began to understand that perhaps she was learning the most important lessons of all. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll speak with the security chief this morning. Guard Mitchell will be granted immediate leave to be with his mother for as long as necessary." Isabella felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Father. This means more to me than you can possibly know." "I can see that," the king replied, his voice softer than usual. "Isabella, I'm proud of you for bringing this to my attention. Caring for the people who serve us is one of the most important responsibilities we have as a royal family." Isabella rushed back to find Guard Mitchell, her heart pounding with excitement at being able to deliver such wonderful news. She found him at his post, having resumed his professional demeanor despite their emotional conversation in the garden. When she approached, she could barely contain her joy. "It's arranged," she said, her voice bubbling with happiness. "My father is speaking with the security chief this morning. You're going to get your leave, and you can go to your mother today.
Guard Mitchell stared at her in disbelief. Your Highness, I don't know what to say.
I never expected. I can't believe you would do this for me. You've done so much for my family, Isabella replied. It's the least we can do for you. What happened next surprised both of them. Guard Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. Your Highness, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to give you something. I've been carrying this around for weeks, trying to find the right moment, but after what you've just done for me, I know this is the time. He opened the notebook and carefully removed a single pressed flower, a small purple violet that had been perfectly preserved between the pages. This morning, when I was sitting in the garden feeling so hopeless about everything, I noticed this little flower growing in a crack in the stone path. Despite being in such a difficult place, it was blooming beautifully, bringing color and life to a spot where nothing should have been able to grow. Isabella looked at the delicate pressed flower, confused but touched by the obvious care he had taken in preserving it. It reminded me of you, Your Highness. Guard Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke from his heart. For weeks now, I've watched you walking through this palace. And I've seen something that I don't think you even realize about yourself. You have this light inside you, this genuine kindness and curiosity about other people. But you're like that flower, trying to bloom in a place that doesn't always allow for natural growth. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat as she began to understand what he was telling her. I've worked in palaces and around royalty for many years, Your Highness. And I've seen how the formality and protocol can sometimes crush the humanity out of people. But not you. Despite being surrounded by all the restrictions and expectations of royal life, you've remained genuinely interested in other people. You've remained kind. You've remained real. Guard Mitchell held out the pressed flower to her. I wanted you to have this as a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, even when it seems like the world is trying to force you into a rigid mold, your true nature can still shine through. You have something precious inside you, Princess Isabella, something that the world desperately needs. Don't ever let anyone convince you to hide that light. Isabella took the pressed flower with trembling hands, and as she looked at it, tears began streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sadness or frustration like so many she had shed over the past months. These were tears of recognition, tears of gratitude, tears of feeling truly seen and understood, for the first time in her life. For weeks, I've been feeling so lost, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. I've felt like I was disappearing behind all the royal duties and expectations. I felt like nobody could see who I really am underneath the crown and the title. I see you, Guard Mitchell said gently. I've always seen you. You're not just a princess, Your Highness. You're a young woman with a beautiful heart who cares deeply about other people. That's a gift that has nothing to do with your royal status and everything to do with who you are as a person. Isabella looked up at him through her tears, holding the pressed flower as if it were the most precious thing she had ever been given, and in many ways it was. She had received countless expensive gifts throughout her life, jewels and artwork and rare treasures from around the world, but none of them had ever touched her heart the way this simple pressed flower did. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for this beautiful reminder, and thank you for showing me what real kindness looks like. Thank you, Your Highness, for giving me the chance to be with my mother during her final days. Your kindness has given me the greatest gift imaginable. As Guard Mitchell prepared to leave for his mother's bedside, Isabella carefully placed the pressed violet between the pages of her own journal, where she knew she would see it every day. She understood now that the gift he had given her was not just a flower but a new understanding of herself and her potential to make a real difference in other people's lives. Over the following days, as news of Guard Mitchell's emergency leave spread through the palace, Isabella noticed a change in how the other staff members looked at her. There was a new warmth in their greetings, a new respect in their manner that had nothing to do with her royal title and everything to do with her actions. They had seen her use her influence not for her own benefit, but to help someone who needed it. And that had changed their perception of her completely. Isabella began to understand that true leadership was not about commanding respect through authority, but about earning it through compassion and genuine care for others. She started taking more interest in the people who worked in the palace, learning their names, asking about their families, and looking for ways to make their working conditions better. She convinced her parents to improve the staff break rooms, to provide better healthcare benefits for long-term employees, and to create a fund to help staff members who faced family emergencies. Each of these changes was small in itself, but together they created an atmosphere of mutual care and respect that transformed the entire palace culture. When Guard Mitchell returned 3 weeks later, after his mother's peaceful death surrounded by family, he sought out Isabella to thank her once again. She could see the grief in his eyes, but also a peace that came from knowing he had been able to be with his mother during her final days. "Your Highness," he said, "I can never adequately express what your kindness meant to me and my family. Because of you, my mother's last days were filled with love and comfort." "That gift is beyond price. I'm so sorry for your loss," Isabella replied, "but I'm glad you were able to be with her. That's what family is for." Guard Mitchell nodded, then smiled through his grief. "Your Highness, may I say something personal?" Isabella nodded. "When I first gave you that pressed flower, I hoped it would remind you of your own strength and beauty. But watching what you've accomplished these past few weeks, the changes you've made and how our royal family treats the people who serve them, I realized that you didn't need my reminder. You were already that flower, already blooming with kindness and strength. You just needed to believe in yourself enough to let others see it." Isabella felt tears returning to her eyes, but again they were tears of joy rather than sadness. She realized that in trying to help Guard Mitchell, she had inadvertently discovered something precious about herself. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her understanding of what it truly meant to be royal. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me find who I was meant to be." From that day forward, Princess Isabella approached her royal duties with a new sense of purpose and understanding. She still attended formal dinners and charity galas, still studied languages and politics and cultural arts. But now she did these things not because they were expected of her, but because she understood how she could use these platforms to make a real difference in people's lives. The pressed violet remained in her journal, a daily reminder that beauty and strength could flourish even in the most challenging circumstances, and that sometimes the most meaningful gifts come, not wrapped in gold or silver, but in genuine human compassion and understanding. Years later, when Princess Isabella had grown into a queen known throughout the world for her compassion and her dedication to improving the lives of ordinary people, she would still carry that same journal with the pressed flower inside, and whenever she faced difficult decisions or challenging circumstances, she would remember the day when a humble palace guard had seen her true self and had given her the gift of believing in her own capacity for goodness. The story of the pressed violet became legendary within the palace, passed down through generations of staff members as an example of how genuine kindness and mutual respect could transform not just individual lives but entire institutions. It became a reminder that true nobility was not about titles or wealth, but about the courage to care for others and the wisdom to recognize that every person, regardless of their station in life, had something valuable to offer. Isabella learned that day that the most precious gifts are often the simplest ones, and that sometimes a single act of genuine care can change not just a moment but an entire life. The tears she shed over that pressed flower were the last tears of loneliness she would ever cry, because she had finally understood that meaningful connections were possible, even within the constraints of royal life, for those who had the courage to reach out with authentic compassion and love. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life come from the most unexpected places. When we think of royalty, we imagine grand palaces, expensive jewels, and a life filled with luxury. But what happens when a young princess, surrounded by all the wealth in the world, receives something so simple yet so profound that it brings her to tears? This is the true story of Princess Isabella, a girl who had everything money could buy, but was missing something far more valuable. At just 16 years old, she lived behind golden gates, attended by dozens of servants, yet felt more alone than any commoner on the street. Her days were filled with royal duties, formal dinners, and carefully planned public appearances, but her heart yearned for something real, something genuine in a world of pretense. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when a palace guard, someone she had barely noticed before, would change her perspective on life forever. What he gave her wasn't diamonds or pearls, wasn't a rare painting or an expensive dress. It was something so unexpected, so heartfelt that it would shake the very foundation of everything she thought she knew about human kindness and genuine care. The gift was simple, almost insignificant to most people, but it carried a message so powerful that it would transform not just her day, but her entire understanding of what true wealth really means. This is the story of how a humble guard reminded a princess that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped not in gold, but in pure human compassion. Princess Isabella Maria Constance stood at her bedroom window on the third floor of the royal palace, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens below. At 16, she possessed the kind of beauty that artists spent lifetimes trying to capture on canvas. with cascading auburn hair that caught the light like spun copper and emerald eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom beyond her years. Yet despite being surrounded by unimaginable luxury, her reflection in the ornate mirror showed a girl who looked far older than her age, weighted down by an invisible burden that no amount of royal privilege could lift. The palace she called home was a marvel that attracted visitors from around the world. Built in the 18th century, it boasted over 300 rooms, each more elaborate than the last. Crystal chandeliers from Austria hung from painted ceilings that told stories of ancient victories, while Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes covered marble floors that reflected everything like still water. Isabella's own chambers were a testament to royal excess, with silk wallpaper imported from China, furniture crafted by master artisans, and a wardrobe filled with gowns that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But all this grandeur felt like a beautiful prison to the young princess. Her days followed a rigid schedule that had been planned out weeks in advance. Every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, her personal lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Catherine Worthington, would enter with a team of servants to help her dress for the day ahead. The selection of her outfit alone was a ceremony that could take an hour, with discussions about which jewelry would complement which dress and which shoes would be appropriate for each scheduled activity. Breakfast was served in the smaller dining room, though smaller was relative in a palace where even the intimate spaces could seat 20 people comfortably. Isabella would sit at one end of the long mahogany table while her parents, King Ferdinand and Queen Elena, occupied the other end, making conversation nearly impossible without raising their voices. Most mornings passed in polite silence, broken only by the gentle clink of fine china and the rustle of morning newspapers being turned by white-gloved servants. The king was a man of few words, especially when it came to his daughter. His world revolved around matters of state, diplomatic meetings with foreign ambassadors, and economic policies that would affect the kingdom for generations to come. He loved Isabella in his own way, but it was a distant, formal kind of love, expressed through ensuring she had the finest tutors, the most expensive clothes, and access to cultural experiences that would shape her into a proper royal. He saw her more as an extension of the crown than as his little girl, and their conversations rarely ventured beyond discussions of her studies or upcoming public appearances. Queen Elena was warmer in her affections, but even her love came wrapped in the expectations of royal protocol. She had been groomed from birth to be a queen, and she was determined to ensure her daughter would be equally prepared for whatever royal duties awaited her. Her conversations with Isabella often centered around posture, proper etiquette, and the importance of maintaining the family's reputation at all costs. While her intentions were loving, her approach often left Isabella feeling like a project to be perfected rather than a daughter to be cherished. After breakfast came lessons with various tutors who had been carefully selected for their expertise and discretion. Professor Hartford taught her history and political science, helping her understand the complex web of alliances and treaties that kept their small kingdom stable in an increasingly complicated world.
Madame Rousseau worked on her French and German languages that would be essential for diplomatic relations.
Peterson covered mathematics and sciences, though Isabella often wondered when she would ever need to understand advanced calculus or molecular chemistry in her role as a future royal. The afternoons were typically reserved for cultural refinement. Isabella studied piano with Maestro Giovanni, a temperamental Italian who had once performed for audiences across Europe before accepting the lucrative position as the princess's private instructor. Her fingers could dance across the keys with remarkable skill, playing complex pieces by Mozart and Chopin with the kind of technical precision that impressed everyone who heard her. Yet even her musical abilities felt hollow to her, as if she was performing not from her heart but from a carefully memorized script. Art lessons with Professor Williams introduced her to painting and sculpture, though her work was always critiqued not for its emotional expression but for its technical accuracy and appropriateness for a royal. She created beautiful landscapes and still-life paintings that hung in a private gallery within the palace, each one perfectly executed but somehow lacking the soul that made art truly meaningful. She often found herself wondering what it would be like to paint something wild and free, something that came from pure emotion rather than royal expectation. The evenings brought formal dinners with visiting dignitaries, charity galas where she was expected to charm wealthy donors, or cultural events where her presence was required to show royal support for the arts. Isabella had become expert at the smile that never quite reached her eyes, the graceful curtsy that acknowledged respect while maintaining her superior position, and the art of pleasant conversation that revealed nothing of substance about her true thoughts or feelings. Despite being constantly surrounded by people, Isabella felt profoundly alone. The servants who attended to her every need maintained professional distance, addressing her always as Your Highness and never speaking unless spoken to first. Her tutors were paid to educate her, not to be her friends, and their relationships remained strictly professional. Even the young people she occasionally met at royal functions were either too intimidated by her status to be genuine or too calculating in their attempts to curry favor with the royal family. She had tried on several occasions to connect with people her own age. At charity events, she would spot teenagers volunteering or attending with their families and feel a longing to join their easy laughter and casual conversation. But whenever she approached, the atmosphere would shift dramatically. Voices would become formal, postures would straighten, and the natural flow of young friendship would freeze into uncomfortable politeness. She began to realize that her title meant to open doors, actually created walls between her and the genuine human connections she craved. The palace grounds, while beautiful, felt like an elegant cage. The gardens were works of art, with precisely trimmed hedges forming intricate patterns, fountains that created soothing sounds, and flowers arranged in displays that changed with the seasons. Isabella often walked these paths alone, finding some measure of peace in the beauty around her, but even here she was never truly alone. Security guards maintained discreet distances, always watching, always ready to intervene if needed. Their presence was necessary, she understood, but it served as a constant reminder that her life was not her own. At night, lying in her four-poster bed with silk sheets that cost more than most people's cars, Isabella would stare at the ceiling and wonder what it would be like to live a different life. She imagined walking into a coffee shop without causing a stir, attending a regular school where people knew her as just Isabella rather than Princess Isabella, or having a friend who wanted to spend time with her because they enjoyed her company rather than because they hoped to gain something from the association. She had books, thousands of them, in the palace library, and through reading she could escape into other worlds where people lived ordinary lives filled with extraordinary friendships and adventures. She read stories of teenagers who worried about tests and dating and college applications, problems that seemed wonderfully normal compared to her own concerns about maintaining diplomatic relations and upholding centuries of royal tradition. These books became her windows into a world she could observe but never truly enter. The irony of her situation was not lost on her. She had access to the finest education, the most beautiful clothes, the most luxurious accommodations, and opportunities to travel to places most people could only dream of visiting. Yet all of this wealth and privilege felt meaningless when weighed against her deep desire for authentic human connection and the freedom to discover who she truly was beyond her royal title. Her parents, while loving in their own way, seemed unable to understand her melancholy. When she tried to express her feelings of loneliness, they would remind her of her privileges and responsibilities, suggesting that her discomfort was a small price to pay for the honor of serving her people. They meant well, but their responses only deepened her sense of isolation, making her feel as though her emotions were selfish and inappropriate. The palace staff, from the head butler to the newest kitchen assistant, maintained professional relationships that never crossed into genuine friendship. They were kind and respectful, but Isabella understood that their jobs depended on maintaining proper boundaries. She was not someone they could confide in or joke with casually. She was their employer, their superior, someone to be served but not befriended. As the months passed, Isabella began to feel as though she was slowly disappearing behind the role she was expected to play. The real Isabella, the girl who loved silly jokes and wanted to learn to drive a car and dreamed of maybe studying literature or psychology at a university, was being buried under layers of royal protocol and public expectation. She felt like an actress who had been playing the same character for so long that she was forgetting who she really was underneath the costume. It was during this period of deep introspection and growing sadness that Isabella began to notice the palace guards in a different way. These men and women, who she had previously seen as simply part of the background of her life, began to emerge as individuals in her awareness. She started to observe their routines, their professionalism, and the quiet dignity with which they performed their duties. They were protectors, she realized, people who had dedicated their careers to keeping her and her family safe. Yet she knew almost nothing about them as people. Among all the guards, one in particular caught her attention, though she couldn't quite say why. Guard Thomas Mitchell was not the most senior member of the security team, nor was he the most imposing physically. He was a man of average height with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything, while drawing attention to nothing. What set him apart was something subtle in his manner, a warmth that seemed to radiate from him even as he maintained perfect professional composure. Isabella began to notice small things about Guard Mitchell that distinguished him from his colleagues. When children visited the palace on school tours, she observed how his stern professional expression would soften almost imperceptibly as he watched them with obvious fondness. When elderly visitors struggled with the palace steps, he would position himself nearby, ready to offer assistance if needed. while maintaining the dignity of those who might feel embarrassed about needing help. She noticed that he was always the first to volunteer for additional duties and the last to leave his post. Other guards would sometimes chat quietly among themselves during slower periods, but Guard Mitchell remained focused and alert, as if he took personal responsibility for the safety of everyone in the palace. Yet despite his serious dedication to his work, there was something gentle about his presence that made Isabella feel safer not just physically but emotionally as well. One rainy Tuesday morning, as Isabella stood at her bedroom window feeling particularly melancholy about another day of scheduled activities and formal interactions, she spotted Guard Mitchell walking across the courtyard below. Something about his purposeful stride and the way he paused to help a servant who had dropped some packages made her wonder, for the first time, about the life he led outside the palace walls. Did he have a family? What made him smile when he wasn't on duty? What dreams did he harbor beyond his professional responsibilities? The thought struck her that in all her years of living in the palace, surrounded by people whose job it was to care for her needs, she had never really considered the personal lives and individual stories of those who served her family. They had remained largely invisible to her, not through any conscious cruelty but through the natural self-absorption of youth and the insular nature of royal life. For the first time, she began to wonder if perhaps the connection she craved, the genuine human interaction she had been seeking, might be closer than she had ever imagined. The revelation about her lack of connection with the palace staff troubled Isabella more than she expected it would. That evening, as she sat through another formal dinner with visiting diplomats from neighboring countries, she observed how they anticipated needs before they were expressed, how they remained invisible even while being essential to the success of the evening. For the first time, Isabella began to see the palace not just as her home, but as a workplace for dozens of people who had their own stories, their own families, their own dreams and struggles. The thought that she had lived among them for 16 years without truly seeing them as individuals filled her with a kind of shame she had never experienced before. She had been raised to be gracious and polite to everyone, but grace and politeness, she was beginning to understand, were not the same thing as genuine human recognition and care. The next morning, Isabella made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of taking her usual route from her chambers to the breakfast room, she took a longer path that would lead her through areas of the palace where she might encounter more of the staff, she told herself. She was just exploring parts of her home she had never really paid attention to before. But deep down, she knew she was hoping for some kind of authentic interaction, some glimpse into the real lives of the people who made her privileged existence possible.
This is the book It's About History.com and Ben Palau.